When Frank Sinatra couldn't breathe in that hospital bed, his last words to the doctor beside him shocked everyone. May 14, 1998, 10:47 p.m. at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The oxygen mask had slipped from his face as he fought for air, but Frank wasn't fighting for more time, he was fighting to tell the truth. What came out of his mouth in those final moments would expose secrets that Hollywood, the FBI, and even his own family had spent 50 years trying to bury. "Doctor," Frank whispered, his voice barely audible above the beeping machines, "I need to tell you about the night I killed a man." Dr. Patricia Reynolds froze. She had been treating celebrities for 20 years, but nothing had prepared her for this deathbed confession from America's most beloved entertainer. The man who sang My Way was about to reveal that his way had included murder, betrayal, and a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Frank's weathered hand grabbed Dr. Reynolds' wrist with surprising strength for a dying man. His blue eyes, once described by Ava Gardner as deeper than the Pacific Ocean, now burned with an urgency that cut through the morphine haze. "It was 1962, he continued, each word a struggle. Vegas, the Sands Hotel. Sammy was there, Dean was drunk as usual, and I had just gotten off the phone with Bobby Kennedy. The cardiac monitors screamed warnings, but Frank wasn't finished. They wanted me to eliminate someone, and I did it." 3 days earlier, Frank had been rushed to the hospital after collapsing in his Beverly Hills mansion. His family thought it was another bout with the heart problems that had plagued him since his 70s, but Frank knew this was different. This was his body finally surrendering to the weight of secrets he had carried since the Kennedy administration. As he lay in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines keeping him alive, Frank Sinatra made a decision that would destroy his legacy forever.
He was going to tell the truth.
The truth about the phone calls from the White House at 3 a.m. The truth about the briefcase full of cash he delivered to Chicago. The truth about why Marilyn Monroe really died, and why Sam Giancana ended up with bullets in his head. The truth about the night in 1962, when Frank Sinatra crossed a line that turned America's golden boy into a cold-blooded killer. But you haven't heard the most shocking part yet. Frank's confession wasn't just about murder. It was about how the Kennedy family, the FBI, and the Chicago mob had used him as their personal assassin for over a decade. The same hands that had caressed microphones and serenaded millions had also pulled triggers and disposed of bodies. The same voice that had crooned "Fly Me to the Moon" had also whispered death threats to men who crossed the wrong people. Dr. Reynolds looked around the hospital room, making sure they were alone. Frank's family had stepped out for coffee, giving her a few precious minutes with the dying legend. "Mr. Sinatra," she whispered, "are you sure you want to tell me this?" Frank's response chilled her to the bone. "Sweetheart, I've been keeping these secrets for 40 years. If I die with them, they die with me, and the families of those men deserve to know the truth." The first murder, Frank revealed, had been almost accidental. It was February 1962, and Frank was performing at the Sands in Las Vegas when he received a visit from two men who claimed to work for Attorney General Robert Kennedy. They had a problem. A low-level mob accountant named Vincent the Fish Scalise was threatening to expose the Kennedy family's connections to organized crime unless he received protection and money. "They told me it was patriotic," Frank gasped, his breathing becoming more labored. "They said Scalise was working with the Soviets, feeding them information about our operations. It was the Cold War, doctor. Everyone was a potential enemy." The machines around Frank's bed registered his rising heart rate as he relived that night in Vegas when his life changed forever. Frank described how he had invited Scalise to his penthouse suite at the Sands, ostensibly to discuss a business opportunity. The accountant, a small nervous man with thick glasses and sweaty palms, had arrived at midnight carrying a briefcase full of documents that allegedly proved the Kennedy connection to Sam Giancana's Chicago outfit. "I gave him a drink," Frank continued, his voice barely a whisper now. "Scotch on the rocks, his favorite. But I had already put something in it, something the government boys gave me. They called it the sleeper." Frank's eyes closed as he remembered watching Scalise's confused expression as the poison took effect, the way the man's hands trembled as he tried to understand what was happening to him. But here's where Frank's story took an even darker turn. The government handlers hadn't just wanted Scalise dead, they wanted it to look like natural causes. Frank had to sit there and watch as the poison slowly paralyzed the accountant's respiratory system, making it appear as though he had simply choked on his drink. "I held his hand as he died," Frank whispered. This complete stranger who had never done anything to me personally. I watched the life leave his eyes because some government spooks told me it was my patriotic duty. Dr. Reynolds felt her own hands shaking as she listened to Frank's confession. This wasn't the sanitized version of Frank Sinatra that the public knew, the Rat Pack leader, the legendary performer, the man who had conquered Hollywood and Vegas with equal aplomb. This was a killer confessing to crimes that had been covered up at the highest levels of American government. The aftermath of Scalise's murder, Frank revealed, had been swift and efficient. Within hours, men in dark suits had arrived at the sands to clean up the scene. The body was removed through service elevators, the penthouse was sanitized, and official reports listed Vincent Scalise as having died of a heart attack in a downtown Vegas hotel room. Frank had been congratulated on his patriotic service and given a phone number to call if he ever needed anything from the government. That phone number, Frank gasped, was the beginning of the end of my soul. Over the next several years, Frank would use that number dozens of times, not for personal favors, but to receive assignments. The Kennedy administration had discovered that Frank Sinatra, with his mob connections and entertainment industry access, made the perfect assassin who would suspect America's most famous crooner of being a government killer. The second murder came 6 months later. This time the target was a union leader in Detroit, who had been threatening to expose how the Teamsters were funneling money to support Kennedy's political campaigns. Frank was performing at the Fisher Theater when he received the call. The method was different this time, a staged car accident on a lonely stretch of highway outside the city. Frank described how he had befriended the union leader, Tommy Castellano, during his Detroit stay. Tommy was a good guy, Frank said, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He had kids, grandkids. He just wanted to do the right thing, to expose the corruption he was seeing, and I killed him for it. The car accident had been meticulously planned, a precise hit at 55 miles per hour that sent Castellano's vehicle off a bridge into the Detroit River. Wait, you won't believe what Frank revealed about Marilyn Monroe. On August 4, 1962, the night Marilyn died, Frank Sinatra was not performing in Lake Tahoe as his official schedule indicated. He was in Los Angeles, in Marilyn's Brentwood home, carrying out what would be his most heinous assignment yet. They told me she was going to expose everything, Frank whispered, his voice breaking. About Jack, about Bobby, about all of it. They said she was unstable, that she would destroy the presidency. Frank's description of that night was harrowing. He had arrived at Marilyn's house around 10 p.m., using a key that government handlers had provided. Marilyn, already heavily sedated from the pills her doctor had prescribed, was barely conscious when Frank entered her bedroom. She recognized me, Frank said. Even in that state, she knew who I was. She smiled and said, "Frankie, did you come to sing me to sleep?" The poison Frank administered was designed to mimic a barbiturate overdose, making Marilyn's death appear to be suicide by an unstable actress who had taken too many pills. I held her hand just like I did with the others, Frank confessed. I watched Marilyn Monroe die, and the world thinks she killed herself. The guilt has been eating me alive for 36 years. Dr. Reynolds looked at the cardiac monitors, watching Frank's vital signs fluctuate wildly as he purged these decades-old secrets. She had entered medicine to save lives, but now she was witnessing the death of a man whose life had been built on a foundation of murder and lies. "Mr. Sinatra," she said gently, "why are you telling me this?" Frank's answer revealed the depth of his torment. "Because I'm going to hell, doctor, and I need someone to know the truth. Someone who can decide whether the world should know what really happened." Frank explained that over the years, he had kept detailed records of his assignments, dates, locations, methods, and the government contacts who had ordered the hits. Everything was hidden in a safety deposit box in Switzerland, with instructions that the contents be revealed only upon his death. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Frank wasn't just a government assassin, he was part of a larger network of celebrity killers recruited by the CIA during the Cold War. "They called us the Entertainment Division," Frank gasped. "Performers who could get close to targets without suspicion. There were others, actors, musicians, even comedians. We were the perfect cover because nobody suspects a celebrity of being a killer." Frank named names that would shock the American public if his confessions were ever made public. A famous comedian who had eliminated a Soviet agent posing as a Hollywood producer, a legendary jazz musician who had assassinated a Cuban intelligence officer during a performance in Miami, a beloved actress who had seduced and killed a Chinese diplomat during the Korean War. The network, Frank revealed, had been active from 1960 until the mid-1980s, carrying out assassinations across the globe in service of American intelligence operations. The celebrities involved were recruited through a combination of patriotic appeals, blackmail, and promises of government protection for their various personal scandals and criminal associations. "We thought we were serving our country," Frank whispered, his breathing becoming increasingly shallow. "We thought we were protecting America from its enemies, but we were just murderers with famous faces, doing the government's dirty work while they kept their hands clean." Frank's final confession concerned the cover-up that had protected him and the other celebrity assassins for decades. Every murder had been carefully planned and executed to avoid suspicion. Official investigations were controlled by FBI agents who were part of the conspiracy. Witnesses were silenced or relocated. Evidence was destroyed or manipulated. The American public had been systematically lied to about dozens of deaths that were actually government-sanctioned assassinations. "You're not ready for what Frank said about John F. Kennedy's assassination. Dallas was supposed to be my job," Frank revealed, his voice barely audible now. "They approached me in September 1963, said Kennedy was compromised, that he was going to expose everything about the celebrity assassination program. They wanted me to take him out during a performance at the White House." Frank's refusal to kill President Kennedy, he claimed, was what led to Lee Harvey Oswald being recruited as the patsy for the Dallas operation. "I told them I wouldn't do it," Frank whispered. "Jack Kennedy was my friend. Flawed, sure, but he was the president. I drew the line at killing presidents." Frank's defiance, he revealed, had put him under surveillance by his own government handlers, who began planning his own elimination. The decades following Kennedy's assassination, Frank said, had been a constant struggle between his guilt over the murders he had committed and his fear that speaking out would result in his own death. "They made it clear that my continued silence was the price of staying alive," Frank confessed. "Every time I thought about going to the FBI or the press, something would happen, a car accident involving someone close to me, a break-in at one of my properties, a message delivered through Sam Giancana or one of the other mob guys." Frank's voice was fading fast now, but he had one more devastating revelation. "The safety deposit box in Switzerland doesn't just contain evidence of my murders, it contains proof of everything. The whole celebrity assassination program, the Kennedy cover-up, the government officials who ran the operation, photos, recordings, documents, everything." Dr. Reynolds leaned closer as Frank's breathing became more labored. "Where is the key, Mr. Sinatra?" she asked. Frank's response would ensure that his secrets wouldn't die with him. "Nancy has it, my daughter Nancy. I gave it to her last month, along with a letter explaining everything. I told her to wait until after my funeral, then decide whether the world is ready for the truth." The irony wasn't lost on Frank that his daughter Nancy, who had built her own singing career partially on her father's reputation, would be the one to decide whether to destroy that reputation forever. "She's stronger than I ever was," Frank whispered. "Whatever she decides to do with those documents, I trust her judgment." But what Frank revealed about his relationship with his children in his final moments exposed the personal cost of his double life. "I was never really their father," he confessed. "How could I be? How do you hug your kids goodnight when your hands have strangled a man earlier that day? How do you sing them lullabies when your voice has whispered death threats?" Frank described decades of emotional distance from his children, not because he didn't love them, but because he was terrified they would somehow discover his true nature. Every family vacation, every birthday party, every Christmas morning had been shadowed by the fear that one day they would learn their father was a killer. "Nancy Jr. used to ask me why I was so sad sometimes," Frank whispered. "She was just a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, and she could see something dark in her daddy's eyes. I would tell her I was just tired from performing, but the truth was I was tired from carrying the weight of all those deaths." The confession revealed that Frank's famous feuds with various family members over the years hadn't been about money or career decisions. They had been about his desperate attempts to keep them at arm's length, to protect them from the truth about what he really was. His explosive temper, his periods of depression, his excessive drinking, all of it was rooted in the psychological trauma of living a lie for 40 years. This is where Frank's story gets even more heartbreaking. His legendary romance with Ava Gardner, the great love affair that had captivated Hollywood and the public, had been poisoned by his secret life as an assassin. I loved Ava more than life itself, Frank gasped, but I couldn't tell her the truth about what I was doing for the government. She knew something was wrong, that I was hiding something from her. Frank revealed that his frequent mysterious trips during their relationship, trips he had attributed to recording sessions or business meetings, were actually assassination assignments. The strain of maintaining the lie, combined with Ava's growing suspicions and Frank's guilt-driven drinking, had ultimately destroyed their marriage. The night she left me for the last time, Frank confessed, she looked me in the eyes and said, "Frank, I don't know what you're hiding from me, but whatever it is, it's killing you, and it's killing us." She was right, the secrets were destroying everything I touched. Dr. Reynolds watched the monitors as Frank's vital signs continued to decline. The man who had once commanded stages around the world was running out of time, but he wasn't finished with his confessions. "There's something else," he whispered. "Something about why I'm really dying." Frank's final revelation was that his current illness wasn't entirely natural. 6 months earlier, he had received a phone call from someone claiming to represent the same government faction that had recruited him decades ago. The message was simple: there were new political pressures to eliminate anyone who had knowledge of the celebrity assassination program. "They told me I could die quietly of natural causes, or they could make it look like an accident," Frank said. "I chose this way because I wanted the chance to confess before I died. The pills they've been giving me aren't just for my heart condition. They're slowly poisoning me, but it's a gentle death compared to what they gave the others." Frank explained that several other members of the celebrity assassination network had died under mysterious circumstances in recent years. Car accidents, sudden illnesses, apparent suicides. The government, he claimed, was systematically eliminating everyone who had knowledge of the program to prevent future leaks. "I'm the last one left who knows the whole story," Frank whispered. "After tonight, all the witnesses will be dead except for the government officials who ran the program, and they're never going to talk." As his breathing became more shallow, Frank made one final request. "Doctor, I need you to promise me something. If Nancy decides not to release those documents, if she chooses to protect the family name instead of exposing the truth, I need you to be my backup plan. I need you to tell the world what I told you tonight." Dr. Reynolds looked into Frank Sinatra's fading blue eyes and saw not the legendary entertainer, not the Rat Pack leader, not the man who had sung My Way to millions of fans, but a broken human being seeking redemption in his final moments. "I promise, Mr. Sinatra," she said softly, "if those documents never see the light of day, I'll make sure your confession doesn't die with you." Frank's last words were barely audible. "Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them Frank Sinatra was sorry for what he became." At 10:50 p.m. on May 14, 1998, the machines flatlined, and Francis Albert Sinatra, legendary entertainer and confessed government assassin, was gone. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure complicated by kidney and liver disease. There was no mention of poison, no investigation into his claims of being murdered by his former handlers, no follow-up on his deathbed confessions. Frank Sinatra was buried with full honors, mourned by millions of fans who never knew the dark truth about their idol. But Dr. Patricia Reynolds kept her promise. She documented everything Frank had told her that night, sealing her own account in a safety deposit box with instructions that it be opened only if Nancy Sinatra failed to release her father's evidence within 5 years of his death. The world continues to remember Frank Sinatra as chairman of the board, the voice of a generation, the epitome of cool sophistication, but somewhere in a Swiss bank vault, documents wait that could rewrite American history and expose the darkest secrets of the Cold War era. Whether those secrets will ever see the light of day depends on a daughter's decision about her father's legacy, and whether she believes the world is ready to learn that America's most beloved entertainer was also one of its most prolific killers.